Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Creativity Found, a community for creative learners and educators, connecting adults who want to find a creative outlet with the artists and crafters who can help them do so, with workshops, courses, online events and kits. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. I have invited some podcast shows that I admire and think you might like to make guest appearances on the Creativity Found podcast feed. I have chosen an episode from each show that communicates something of the Creativity Found ethos. Please enjoy, and I hope you're inspired to listen to more episodes by today's guest podcaster.
I'm Leona Fensome. I'm a mum of three under six, and I run an independent production company called Inkslingers Media, where I'm the creative director. I also work at University of Bedfordshire in the Arts and Culture Projects team, and I have a very long title there. It's Heritage Projects and Partnerships Officer.
You're listening to the Mother of All Solutions, stories from mums as they navigate their return to work. With me, Laura Broderick. So welcome listeners to Mother of All Solutions. I'm sat in St Albans today with the lovely Leona Fensome. So hi Leona.
Hello Laura.
How are things?
Things are good.
This is a treat to be sat in the beautiful St Albans surrounding. So you've introduced yourself. So you have many hats, Leona. So let's talk through some of those things that you do and who you are and your family situation. So to set the scene, I saw something on your LinkedIn that really made me smile about you. So I'm going to read this. So here we go, listeners. This is Leona's own words. Being a producer, I'm all about running orders and constantly being mindful of time. My partner and 3 kiddies under 6 years old mimic me always. Come on, gang, we're on the clock. Now, I can't do your Aussie accent. So tell us more about being always on the clock and the busy life you lead and what you're up to.
Yeah, being on the clock's probably more pronounced now since I've had children, and I had my first one, Remy, in May 2016. Evelyn was 2018, and the youngest one, Nathaniel, was June last year. And the reason why I say that, as anyone that has multiples will know, is that you're constantly running in so many different directions. But also because I have a radio background, you suddenly become hyper aware of time, because that's the thing that kind of dictates your environment when you're working in a live studio place. And I got into radio, I think from memory, about 8 years ago. It was probably like February 2015. I'd been doing an undergrad. My Bachelor of Communications was in journalism and PR, and I had these amazing lecturers. There was 3 of them that kept saying to me, go and get some practical experience out in the real world. Even though I was mature age and had worked a lot, I hadn't kind of done anything in the media space as I was changing careers. And I went to my local newspaper. This was when I was living in Perth in Western Australia at the time, so I thought, that's an easy win. I was a journalist at the time, and I thought they'll certainly give me a little gig, being a volunteer, doing something. Didn't hear back from them, so I went to the local community radio station where I'd been a fan and a listener since my high school days. And because I was a music journalist at the time, I thought I'd love to work in the music department, like stocking CDs. Yeah, I'm that old. On the shelves, and that would be my happy place. Yeah, exactly. I remember tapes, all of that. And I thought that would be good. That would give me some experience in what community radio is like. So I met the volunteer manager, Chris Wilden, and we caught up, and he said, not what I thought he'd say. How would you like to be an assistant producer? And I had no idea what an assistant producer was, what they did. And then he sort of set this utopic landscape out, you know, where I could be involved in a 3-hour magazine format show. It was to do with current affairs, environment, politics, entertainment. I could go and interview people. There was an opportunity to maybe present, which gave me the shudders, because to this day I'm not a presenter. I love producing. And I thought, why not? I'll give that a go. And so, yeah, those 3 people and Chris pretty much made me do a U-turn in the pathway that I was going on, and that was how I got into community radio. And that, like I said, it's coming up to 8 years. And so from there I learned a lot about time, because you're always looking at the clock when you're in radio. Everything's always down to the minute, because you've got to hit ad breaks, go to the news, and that really helped me in some kind of funny way, because prior to that I had your classic FOMO, and I was a super impulsive person. I was notorious for double booking myself, launching headfirst into all sorts of adventures, and people would always say that to me. All my best friends used to be like, oh gosh, what's she up to now?
Well, yeah, Leona, I also are guilty of that, and one of my best mates' ex-boyfriends had me in his phone as Laura Late, because I was always late for things. So maybe you were Leona Late, maybe you were
and I'm glad you've said that, because one of my best friends in Melbourne, so I lived in Melbourne in Australia for about 15 years, Kerry, one day I was running late, or maybe I had just fobbed her off. It was one or the other. It wasn't very nice. And she sent me this text message. She's like, Leona, do you know what? When you do this, it's like you just don't value me. You're valuing yourself above me. And that was, I think, in 2007 maybe, and I've never forgotten that. And that really made me think, you know what, that's not all right. I really need to start kind of, curbing that a bit.
Yeah.
No.
But perception's different to intention.
So that text message and getting into radio has now made me less impulsive.
And it's all about the clock now.
And it's all about the clock.
So then thinking about the clock and motherhood fitting in with that. So now you're juggling work, creative director, producer, but also working for a university. You also, I believe, have plans for an academic kind of career in other ways as well. So how do you fit the 3 kids in around that? Are you like a schedule person, or is it just that you are really kind of just aware of everyone's needs and you just make it work? What's your...
I think I've always been really productive. Even in saying, this impulsivity's kind of waned by the nature of having kids as well a lot. Prior to that, I always had 2 jobs, when I was in my early 20s, I always had some kind of full-time or part-time gig, and I always had some kind of second job, predominantly in hospitality, because that was the first industry I worked in for about 10 years. So I was typically working in a bar, working in a club, that kind of thing. Yeah, and then interestingly, I always studied, because I'm your classic lifelong learner. So I always had something brewing in the background, whether it was like a short course or a diploma or something. So they were the things that really fueled me. And so I guess, bringing kids into the mix, your time suddenly becomes, I don't want to say much more precious, but you just suddenly have more of a sense of it. And then you've got, little people that demand your time. So you can't always lay out plans and expect that they're going to end up as you've set them out to be. So the good thing about kids is that I think I became a lot more patient, actually. That was one thing I think that's really benefited me in terms of having children. But to set the context, I left Australia David and I, my husband, we left in March 2017 and moved to the UK then. And so we had Remy. She was about 9 or 10 months. And really it was, 3 things for me. I wanted to pursue a radio career here. The big dream was the BBC, as many Australians, in radio like to kind of see or get realised, is that, idea of working with the BBC. I wanted to do a PhD before I was 50. And then the classic thing, I just wanted a little, or actually no, big English countryside home, because I'd watched so many of those English shows. What are some of them now? Not Homes Under the Hammer, but all the ones about idyllic,
probably the ones I avoided.
Grand Designs, all those things where people had these beautiful country homes with fireplaces. So they were the aspirations and what brought us here.
Wow, you came for the dream, the beeb, the house in the
I
country.
did. Yeah. And to answer your question about scheduling, it's been really challenging, because it's not like you're an individual that's embarking on a career in study. You have to throw in a child and all of their needs as well. And then, when you have a second one, you've got the logistics of, as you know, because you've got two, how you manage that between the two of you. And then you throw a third one in. And I met someone a while ago. She had 5 children. And I did at the time ask her, when I think I just had Remy, how do you do it? And she's like, do you know what's funny? After about 3, they all just kind of fit in.
Okay.
And she was so calm and rational, and she made it appear to be like a very easy thing, having multiples.
And it's interesting. And I'm even conscious of the question that I asked around, like, how do you make it work? Because, of course, we don't want to set us up as mothers to be seen as super women, because, nobody is. And that's, an aspiration that can be negative as well, because it can put pressure on us to try and be everything to everyone all the time. But also we do have to acknowledge that we do make a lot of things happen for our own families, our communities around us, whether that's helping out with school events or whatever it is that you do in your community, and then obviously your workplaces, depending on how you manage your work life. So it's a really tricky one to ask questions like that without putting us on a pedestal, but without diminishing what we are. And I hope you understood the
I do, and I'm thinking
back
to how I actually developed some of those behaviours. And my last sort of corporate job ended in 2013, where I quit. I'd been in the role for about 6 years, and it was for a big online media company in Australia called Seek. It's an employment job board, and I was in a senior account manager position, and it was very much your classic, advertising, recruitment, sales world, where you're working to quarterly budgets, and it's that real work hard, play hard philosophy. So we had to do 8 to 10 meetings a week. So as you can imagine, lots of talking. You had to hit certain budgets. So you were almost living by some kind of routine, if that makes sense. You were living by a spreadsheet. You were living by a budget. You were living by a calendar. And I guess, that can be detrimental because there's intense pressure around that. But when I left that environment and became a freelancer, so when I started this undergrad that I mentioned, the Bachelor of Comms, and I started becoming a features writer and doing my own thing, I still lived by a calendar, but it's going to sound so silly. I started colour coding my calendar.
Oh, beautiful.
And so what I've always tried to prioritise, even though we did talk about not getting to the gym this morning, was that my health. So when do I go to the gym? When do I go for a walk? When do I go for a swim? And that'd be a certain colour. And then what are my meeting colours? And then what are my downtime colours? And so now that I've got kids, they're in there. So as you would know, you've got exactly all the school stuff, all their, wraparound activities when I catch up with my friends. So I live by that. I'm very visual. And so for me, that's a good indicator of where the load is. Are there lots of kids stuff on and less me time? Have I got tons of work things happening? So I try to, make sure that there's an even spread. I don't like to say work-life balance, and I try hard not to say that I'm juggling things, because as anyone that, runs their own business or has been self-employed knows, and especially in the creative industries, there really isn't a balance. I think you have to set boundaries, and sometimes we learn that through absolute failings and burning out and high stress points. So I know in myself when I hit a natural point of feeling really exhausted, so then I just take some time out, binge watch Netflix stuff, catch up with my friends, and that recharges me. But I don't know anyone that has developed some kind of, perfect way of managing all of that.
No, and we all deal with things differently. So let's chat about the radio side. So you got into community radio almost not completely by surprise, but it wasn't like your...
It was by surprise. It wasn't on my radar. You're right, Laura. It was not on the kind of, this is the direction I'm going with this degree. I wanted to be a magazine features journalist. The glossy magazines? When I was a kid, I used to go to the news agency. I lived in the north of Western Australia and buy Smash Hits and the Face magazine and Dolly and all these things. And I'd have big stacks of them.
Dolly.
It's an Australian one. It was kind of like a girl or teenage girl version of Cleo or Cosmo, that kind of thing. And so I was always a magazine kid, and that was my aspiration from doing the degree. I wanted to write, high profile pieces, like interview people and write about their lives. It was always about people's lives. That was my thing. And so when the community media thing came up to get practical experience, it piqued my interest because I thought the newspaper avenue was going to be me. And I thought, well, that ties to magazines, but it didn't, because I never heard back from anyone. And so then it became radio. And I think the thing about radio that really drew me in was the family nature of RTR-FM in Perth, Western Australia. I worked at RTR or volunteered, and Triple R. They have tons of volunteers, like we're talking in the hundreds, and there's a real collective atmosphere within there. But also it was the transformation. I could see with all these individuals that had other things going on, like they were studying, they had lives, they had families. There was this amazing transformative effect that happened to them the minute they stepped inside that space. And I loved that, and I could see from talking to people what it had done for them. And to this day, 8 years down the line, that is the thing that I've loved about being in radio, is what it can do to people from the minute they start something to where they end up. And it's also transferable, because I come from such a strong, employment background as well. That is really crucial for me, is to see people either being recognised for talent they didn't know they had, or developing skills and having that euphoric moment, that aha moment, like, wow, I actually did that thing.
I made something. And I feel like that's how I know you as well. You've been like really helpful to me starting the podcasting. Like if I've needed something to get some advice on, I've kind of bounced a few things off you. So I've seen that myself, and so that's really interesting that you've had that in your community radio context. And you're still, even though you're not working community radio now, you're still very pro community radio and speaking at events. And
I think it's an underdog thing, and I don't ever like to generalise, but I think one thing about being Australian is we very much we go for the underdog. We like the little guy to rise up and beat all the odds, because everyone's against that person or that situation. And I think for me, advocacy for community radio is really because they're in the heart of wherever, their locality is. And then anyone in that locality has opportunities to come and do something there, which I absolutely love. And that means they have meaning, their lives are valued, and they're contributing. And, even though I cut my teeth as a volunteer, I did go on at Radio Verulam in St Albans, who are now Mix 92.6, to be their ops and volunteer manager, which was a paid contract. And, even through that role, I saw and was able to help that transformation, with close to 90 to 100 volunteers. So amazing. I've been a volunteer as a producer. I've been in senior management in community radio. So I've kind of done the whole inner mechanics of, that world. And I think, it's a really crucial space, particularly, when you do study media and things like that, you start looking at alternate spheres, don't you? Like countercultures and subcultures and places where people can genuinely have diversity and media plurality. And, that's what's really important to me, especially now that I'm in oral histories, is I like people to have a chance to talk about their lives and have meaning, rather than maybe dominant or influential or extroverted people always having the time in the sun to talk about things. That's right.
And so with that kind of transition to then you developing your career in that audio space, and now being creative director of your own company, Inkslingers, tell us a little bit about, I know a little bit about some of your projects, but maybe kind of give a flavour of some of the things you've worked on, and just to kind of praise you and congratulate you on mic. You received a bronze, with a group of colleagues for your Tape Letters project yesterday. Was it even yesterday or 2
Wednesday
days?
night.
Wednesday night for the Audio Production Awards. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So do you want to say a little bit about that project or other projects, or your interests in audio?
I set Inkslingers Media up, which is the independent production company I mentioned, in June 2018, when Evelyn, my second, was 4 months old. So I never do things in half measures, that's just the classic thing you'll learn about me, and you probably know that about me already. And the lofty ambition, which I'd had in Australia, was that one day I wanted to work on documentaries. Again, this really harks back to, I like deep dives into people's lives. And so I'd set it up, and then I'd been in that role at Radio Verulam as the Ops and Volunteer Manager. I was freelancing at BBC Radio 4, so Media Show, Saturday Live, Women's Hour. And then I think it was, not really doing much. It had kind of sat there because I was more like in the actual roles that I was in at the Beeb in the station. And I forgot to mention I was doing my honours at the time as well. So I'd finished the undergrad. I think I finished that like in 2017, graduated. Then I think once Evelyn was born, I was like, right, let's do an honours, because why not add more things onto my plate? And that was in community radio volunteer production. So it was all relative. And then, obviously, as we know, COVID hit in, March 2020, and sadly my contract had to end, and the BBC work ended because, most programs went in-house in terms of staff. And I found myself for the first time in a really long time having sort of like an identity crisis, but not in any way that I was like, oh my God, woe is me, but more like, what am I going to do? Like all my worth was tied to what I was doing, and I felt like I was really kind of on a trajectory, and then that was just like the rug had been pulled out from under my feet. And I essentially then reached out to a couple of mentors that were in radio drama, funnily enough, and they said to me, what they were seeing was this real like rise in people looking back on their lives and thinking about things they'd done in the past but never got to fully realise. And I thought, well, I had always loved the long form side of journalism. That was me. Like I'd always loved being able to sit with people, talk about their lives. And then I thought, well, how do I do that? And someone said to me, well, that's, oral histories. If you want to do that, why don't you start moving into that side of the audio world? Because the audio world at that time was filled with freelancers like me that suddenly had no work, no money. The landscape was competitive for anything that was around, and everything was going remote. And I was so conscious that I had to be really mindful of the fact that I had kids and I needed to have something in play. And so I thought, well, I'll train up in in the oral history side of audio production. And that was really how I ended up on my journey of getting into the series work that I've done. And I came across tape letters, I think not long after I'd been training as an oral historian, and Broderick was speaking during South Asian Heritage Month. And I'm always drawn to people that are really larger than life, and he's full of energy, right?
I've not met him, so
one day you will, and you'll see what I mean. And he's absolutely wonderful. And he was bursting off the screen talking about tape letters and how he'd found his dad's cassettes. And I thought, oh my God, this oral history project about this British Pakistani community that use these cassette tapes is a radio series. Like I can actually hear this thing. I can actually see myself stopping the car while it's on to hear what is being said. So I approached him, and then he was like, that is insane, because that's my dream, to make this thing into a radio series. I'm like, well, let's just do it. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but then we stumbled on the Audio Content Fund where we could get funding to make a project, and so we put that in, and that's how Tape Letters was born. And at the same time, I volunteered on a couple of oral history projects, one to do with the Marconi Company, so veterans that had worked at the Marconi Company as young apprentices, and a local one called A County Remembers to do with war memorials and public remembrance. So that gave me practical skills while COVID was happening, to remotely learn and understand how oral histories worked, and respect the fact that I was moving into something very different and much more formalised than audio production.
Yeah, super exciting. It's like, I mean, there are many strings to your bow, kind of, but you're also, as you said, a lifelong learner, so you're not fazed by having to, embrace something new, and you kind of do that, which is admirable. And I come from a long line of teachers on my mum's side. They'd all been teachers in Myanmar, which is Burma, and I think you take away positive and negative mantras from family, and the positive one I've always had, and I remember this ever since I was little, was Mum always used to say to me, knowledge is power. I remember reading like Reader's Digest when I was little, and lots of books that ran the house, and that was the thing that my mum always, I guess, stood in the shadows with me about, was education. She was always championing me learning, and even if I did different courses and things, she was always there, that's fantastic, like you keep going. And I want to be a travel consultant. No, I don't. I want to study human resource management. No, I don't. I'm going to do a business degree. I don't flip-flop, but your life as you get older, you take many different paths, and right? You're curious.
You go through phases. So that was the reason why I guess I did the undergrad, because through all of that, I never really had a good kind of handle on finishing stuff, and that is the negative mantra that I guess I wanted to mention from my dad, because it was a really sort of unhappy childhood that I had in terms of family. Like my mum and dad always were fighting a lot and things like that. And he sort of had this thing that he used to say to me where, oh, you're just going to be a failure. You're never going to amount to anything. So coupled with knowledge is power, I sort of self-sabotaged a lot, know, in terms of work and things like that. And so when I actually graduated in my undergrad, as a mature age student, and when I graduated in my honours, they were big deals for me because I realised, you know what, I can finish stuff. I can actually commit to something and see it through. And now I guess the icing on the cake is I'm waiting to find out if my PhD application is successful, where I'll be getting a bursary to study community radio, of course.
What else?
So I guess life is a funny journey, isn't it? I'm a big believer in, mentorship and surrounding yourself with people that you can soundboard things out with, but then also dealing with adversity, right? Like dealing with challenges and things like that, because I think we can always do something. We have got it in us. And that's why I like to help people. When you mentioned you've always come to me, I get so much joy, maybe more than from my own achievements. When someone says to me, do you know what? I did this thing. I got accepted on this thing. It makes me feel so proud.
Yeah. And just those moments. And in your work with University of Bedfordshire, you're sort of facilitating other people's creativity at the minute as well, aren't you?
Very much.
Yeah. Is that I don't know if that's an appropriate phrasing of it, but
no, it really is. You're right. So Luton, where the campus is located, there's 4, but I'm at the Luton one, has been overlooked a lot traditionally for funding. So as a consequence, there's a really radical arts culture there, which is amazing. But in saying that, people have done this off the smell of an oily rag, which is, really quite something when you think about it. Arts and culture thrives often, doesn't it, in situations like that. So my manager, Emma Gill, who's an ex-theatre practitioner, is an incredible person. She wrote a bid once COVID hit to help support that scene in Luton was emerging cultural practitioners, particularly to do with heritage, because it's a heritage fund. And so, that is the bulk of my work. I work one-on-one, mentoring and developing people to realise heritage projects. So there's a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of, like I mentioned before, being a sounding board, fleshing out ideas. People sometimes, their confidence can be shook if they've, sort of given a glimpse of an idea to someone and that person said to them, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to find the money for that? Or where's the time? You've got
the
kids.
Negativity creeps in.
That's right. It creeps in and then you downplay your ambition. But I like people to think, no, you know what? That is so wild and bizarre and crazy. I'm going to make it happen, Or even, how do we reverse engineer it? That's often my approach, is tell me what the most, incredible thing is you want to do, and let's just work backwards from that.
And we'll find the practical ways around the idea. And And I think there's something quite nice about that idea of heritage sitting within the arts, right? Rather than necessarily...
Totally agree with you.
Sort of seeing it as a kind of a static thing that's just something to be remembered. It's actually something to be interpreted and used, and you're right. Or maybe even a thing that is the domain of certain people, because that's true.
Coming from Australia, I think the UK is really enriching for me, because history's dotted around everywhere. Like you and I are sitting in St Albans, and it seems so silly, but there's,
you can hear the bells now.
You can hear the bells. It's like timing. There you go. Like the cemetery at the Abbey where we are, these beautiful glorious buildings, and we don't have that degree of history in Australia. So for me it was really novel coming here. But then also I know that heritage and history can seem inaccessible to a lot of people. Like, why would I get involved in that, or what can I do? So I like that more and more people are thinking of creative ways they can engage and share history.
Amazing. Super interesting. So Leona, it's been so good to get that kind of potted history of your career and kind of get a sense of it, and I hope that the listeners have got a flavour of your journey with that. So let's talk about the sort of the broader context of motherhood and work, because obviously all these things, however much of a learner or however practical or ambitious you are, you're in a context, you're in a society, you're in a place, and we met. We only physically met for the first time a year ago, but we'd been chatting online. That sounds like
we'd been internet buddies. I know. It sounds odd without the context, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I was stalking you
on Twitter.
So we'd had moments of sharing the highs and lows of life, I suppose, especially around pandemic and thinking about how you are in the world that we're in. So we're coming up to the end of 2022, and I wondered just maybe we could take some time to reflect on, I suppose, where you think things are at. Obviously, we both follow and listen and learn from sort of charities who are in the kind of parenting space, or you're obviously from a community radio background, so you kind of absorb news and journalism. And I don't know, I'm not quite sure what direction the conversation will take us in, Leona, but, you know, for listeners to Mother of All Solutions, they're probably also very similar to us in that way. So I just thought some reflections on, like, do you feel hopeful, or do you feel like the weight of the recession, or what's your immediate thought on where
Moving
we're at?
into this role that I'm in, that we've been talking about, the Uni of Beds one, has done something really quite remarkable to how I think, in that I'm almost completely surrounded by arts practitioners for the first time in a super long time. And so, like, when, you know, I think COVID first hit, I started working more with people that were based in arts industries in terms of my audio work. And I feel like life always goes full circle, because in high school I did theatre for the last 3 years of high school, and funnily enough I actually got ducks of theatre art, so I thought I was going to have this, you know, live theatre career, which, you know, I never realised. But now I'm literally surrounded by theatre makers, applied theatre people, and it's all very brilliant because they jump in and out of character all day, so I love that. But the reason I'm saying that is because it made me start thinking in a much more unconventional and radical way, in the sense that I think sometimes I think from a safety perspective, because COVID has been so uncertain, right, it's thrust all of us into very kind of uncertain and unsettling situations, that, you know, we don't necessarily have to think about things in a linear way anymore. And even oral histories are not like that to some degree, in that memory isn't linear. But how people that I now either work with or are developing or meet with on a daily basis approach things is very much from this experimentation frame of mind, and I absolutely love it. Like, there's so much more validity in play and in playmaking and in piloting stuff and in prototyping stuff and in, I guess, what we would normally call R&D, like, you know, research and development, is considered experimentation. And through all these different artists I've met, they've talked a lot about, you know, space. Like, sometimes if they don't have a maker space or access to space, that compromises that first initial part of pure experimentation. And I love that. And I think we can adopt more of that in our lives and sort of digress more away from everything having to be structured. Like, I know I run to the clock, but you know, that's more about time and the fact that I do a lot of stuff. So I don't like to be late, because then I have, like, my friend Kerry, the Kerrys of the world, saying, you don't value me.
And you're like, I do.
That's what that's about. But yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, I really do feel hopeful. And I say that because, you know, what's that saying that people use, doom scrolling? I mean, let's face it, we can all doom scroll ourselves silly.
Which, you know,
I
have been doing.
Which sometimes media and the way we absorb information is geared towards. And I know there are counters to that. And there's amazing, you know, I guess platforms like Positive News and things like that are trying really hard to uplift, you know, great things people are achieving. But that's what the arts has done for me, is it's shown me that with nothing, people can be so incredibly, you know, there's such ingenuity, you know, and interaction. And I love the fact, you know, that it enables anyone and everyone to participate or equally look at something and have their own take on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's super interesting. And I think there's something that I struggle with around the nuance of life, which is, you know, the doom and the practicality of the world that we're in and situations that we're in that are, you know, often tricky or tough, and maybe not for you immediately, but you see that. Like, I mean, I noticed recently, like, I live near Brixton, the amount of rough sleepers in Brixton is just like kind of increased. I mean, the other day I was like walking through with the kids and trying not to ignore it, but also thinking like the kids are going to notice this, and like, you know, so on that sort of level, even if it's not my day-to-day life, I'm like conscious of that. But also, like, I'm also quite a creative person, quite a hopeful, positive person, and I want to kind of keep that in either my day-to-day sort of being with my kids or in my workplace or whatever it is. And I think trying to find that not balance again. Balance again is such a bloody word. That how do you marry them both? And I think you're someone that does it very well. And I think trying to kind of, especially for parents and mothers in particular who are in busy situations and maybe are often in tricky situations as well, to try and be mindful of the situations they're in, but also be creative and
and I've got creative children. Like my girls very much, like, for a long time drew on all the walls of the house, and I realised, like, that's just as much as it gets your goat. Their expression, and David and I were forever scrubbing things off walls, and they've always got colouring in pens strewn everywhere. They're forever drawing and colouring in.
Funny.
The way they think, I think, is naturally quite creative and unconventional, and I have learned to really respect that and honour that about them, and sort of go with the flow more. And I think sometimes our kids can teach us a lot, as much as like we're like, "Rah!"
That's so funny. I was listening to Ez Devlin, who's an artist, set designer, and she was talking about how she was allowed to draw on the walls as a kid. She was in quite a creative household, and I was just like thinking about that, and it was, I'll send you the link because it's interesting.
When they do it with Sharpies, that's when that's sad. I've been there
put the
of a late
away.
night scrubbing away trying to get a Sharpie off a wall.
Hide the Sharpie. I mean, it's been super interesting because obviously I knew some of your story, but I didn't know all of it. And I really hope that you listeners have enjoyed learning a bit about Leona's career and background and some of her thoughts on creativity and parenting as well. So I really hope you've enjoyed it. So Leona, if people want to connect with you, how would they do that? What's the best way?
Probably the website, Inkslingers Media website. They can find me, or please do connect with me on LinkedIn, because I consider that to be like my Rolodex. Remember those things? As I meet people, I just literally add them to my LinkedIn Rolodex, and not because I'm trying to amass like a massive amount of whatever, but more just so I have people, other than phone numbers and business cards, it's kind of all there. Or as my kids say when I go to work, are you going to go work at the Universe today? Or they can find me at the Universe if you live in Luton or Bedfordshire and you are one of these, amazing arts practitioners or upcoming, emerging in the heritage space. You find me at the University of Bedfordshire.
Oh, I love it. I completely love it. And and I want to thank you for your support to me as well. So thanks, Leona.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the Mother of All Solutions in St Albans with my guest Leona Fensome. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share it with your friends. You can get in touch with me, Laura, as your host and producer via @SolutionsMother on Instagram or Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn.
The Rolodex.
The Rolodex. The digital Rolodex. Just as my name, Laura Broderick. Be lovely to connect with you all. So have a great day, whatever you're up to. Take care. Bye. Bye, Leona.
Bye.